This is not just a West Coast issue.
This is the end of the line.
The Northern Gateway Pipeline is a proposed pipeline that would run 1,200 kilometers from Bruderheim, Alberta to Kitimat, BC, and out through the Douglas Channel in oil supertankers towards Asian markets. It's proposed by oil mogul Enbridge, who's had a very nasty track record with oil spills. It would call for increased production of the tar sands, leading to 525,000 barrels of bitumen being produced every day, pumped through the pipeline. It's not a question of if an oil spill were to happen, but when.
I oppose the Northern Gateway pipelines because they're going to destroy the livelihood of many communities.
The Northern Gateway is a disaster about to happen.
There are other ways to fix the economy.
I'm against the Enbridge pipeline because I don't think it is followed with a fair democratic process.
I'm against the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline because I believe in protecting my coast against the dangers of increased tanker traffic.
I'm thoroughly against the Northern Gateway pipeline for the simple reason that there's overwhelming evidence that there will be a spill eventually, and it will have extreme environmental consequences.
Pipelines are almost like a piece of Swiss cheese. They're going to leak at some point in time.
It's not the pipeline we need to be worried about per se, it's what's coming in one end and going out the other. You know, we're feeding into this pipeline, or will be feeding into this pipeline, some of the dirtiest fossil fuel, most carbon-intensive fossil fuels on the planet.
My major concerns with the Northern Gateway pipeline is generally around the tar sands as a whole and energy efficiency and how we're taking greater and greater risks for lower and lower quality energy. And I mean quality of energy in terms of the amount of energy it takes to get out 1 unit of energy is becoming smaller and smaller as we extract more and more from the oil sands.
Now in the water, the risks are also significant, and I don't think Enbridge, as a terrestrial company, has duly acknowledged the environmental risk associated with the massive scale of shipping that is proposed to navigate occasionally treacherous waters.
If this pipeline goes through, it's going to threaten resource-based economies in BC. Tens of thousands of people base their livelihoods on the tourism and fishing industries, which require pristine environmental conditions in order to function properly.
The Northern Gateway Pipeline, I think, is an incredibly stupid and greedy effort by Enbridge and a whole lot of other people, because it's the Douglas Channel. If you've ever been out in that part of British Columbia, there's no place to take a big vessel filled with bitumen.
I think what the government and all the parties involved need to realize is that the economic benefits will never outweigh the cost it will have on the environment.
Any initiative that privileges economic output over environmental security deserves to be stopped and thought about.
The National Energy Board has an obligation to consult with Aboriginal groups, and it is by no means clear that they have done so in any authentic manner.
So far, there are over 40 First Nations groups who have laid claim to the land in the projected path of the pipeline. And these are First Nations groups that not only have been ignored already for hundreds of years, but are going to be ignored if we don't do something about it. The Supreme Court has already identified their consultations as hasty, insincere, and inadequate. So these First Nations groups, whether or not they own or lay claim to the land, are still going to be ignored. And their beloved land is going to be destroyed, and their values are going to be ignored, as well as their basic human rights for clean land, air, and water. And these are the types of things that no pipeline project is going to be able to buy back once they're gone.
This is not something that the majority of Canadians want.
From coast to coast, Canadians everywhere oppose this. It's not what we want for our country, it's not what we want, it's not worth the economic cost. That's the thing that I think people need to understand, and Enbridge needs to understand. It's not worth the cost. We're not going to change our mind, we're not going to be convinced.
The biggest thing is, why are we building something that's going to get us oil when we could build something just as big of a project that's going to focus on solar power or wind power or water power, something renewable and something that we could keep using for our lives, for our children's lives, and for our grandchildren's lives.
Wild salmon.
Human rights. Destruction of the forest.
Biodiversity.
Oil spill.
Destruction of home.
The First Nations groups.
Deforestation.
Risky passages.
Carbon emissions.
Ecosystem health.
Haida Gwaii.
Habitat fragmentation.
The Spirit Bear.
Earthquakes.
It's the end of the line.
This is 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 the end of the line.
On Saturday, November 17th at 1 p.m. Atlantic time, we're holding a massive protest to combat the pipeline in the academic quad at Mount Allison University. If you're watching this video from anywhere else in Canada, we invite you to hold protests wherever you live. On November 17th, tweet #EndOfTheLine, spread the word on Facebook, YouTube, and spread this video. Show it to everyone you know, and send a clear and concise message to the Government of Canada and Enbridge that you oppose the pipeline. So November 17th, 1 p.m. Atlantic time, stand up against the Northern Gateway Pipeline. This is the end of the line.